My name is Erin Payton, and I'm the Executive Director of the 19th Century Charitable Association, which is located in Oak Park, Illinois. Our mission is strengthening our community through learning, giving, and the sharing of our landmark building. And we have another wonderful Monday member program for you today. And before I bring our presenters on, I just want to let you know that if something that gets brought up in today's program sparks a comment or a question, you can go ahead and leave that in our Q&A or in our chat. And if we have time at the end of the program, we will unmute you and you can ask the question yourself. So sit back and relax. And I'm going to bring to the program Deb Hammond, who is our literature chair.
Okay, this is our next to last literature program. And we're bringing you today Layne Fargo, who is a writer and has got 2 books out, and they are thrillers or suspense novels. Temper is the one that we've been talking about, and They Never Learn, her newest book. She's also vice president of the Chicagoland chapter of Sisters in Crime, and she's created a podcast called Unlikable Female Characters. Not that we know anyone like that, right? She lives in Chicago with her partner and her pets. I went and looked at reviews for her books because suspense and myself do not get along real well, so I wanted to find out about them. I love the concept of the book Temper, and the review said that created an unbearable sense of suspense. Every chapter created more and more suspense, and said that there were multiple plot twists and that it was interesting reading a book that didn't have a murder as the main event. So I'd like to present Layne Fargo.
Thank you so much for having me today. Thanks for the intro, Deb. I am Layne Fargo. I'm the author of several psychological thrillers. I live and write in the Rogers Park neighborhood in Chicago. So this is my idealized writing scenario where I'm at a coffee shop with my laptop and everything. And then this is a little bit more the reality of my writing life. I have 2 pets who like to supervise everything I do. My dog and cat like to climb all over my keyboard. And so this is expectations versus reality of the writing life. My most recent book is They Never Learn, which came out in hardcover last year. And then it's going to come out in this beautiful paperback edition next month on April 20th. It is about a female serial killer who hunts rapists on the college campus where she teaches, and it has been optioned for television. I'm actually writing the pilot episode, so I'm working on that now with a production company, developing that for the screen, which has been really interesting. But the book we're going to talk about primarily today is Temper. This is my first book, which came out in 2019. And it is a psychological thriller that's set in Chicago's storefront theater scene. So Temper is about an actress named Kira who, after years of struggling, she finally gets the role of her dreams, which means it's a really great part. It's at this hot theater company, but it means she has to work with this very infamous director who everyone tells her is difficult and just awful to work with, named Malcolm Mercer. Kira thinks she can handle him. She's kind of been through a lot before. She's been around a lot of terrible men, and she just thinks she can manipulate this to her advantage and make it work for her. But she quickly, as soon as she starts rehearsals for the play, finds out that she's completely in over her head. Malcolm is much worse than she knew, and the rest of the book is essentially a power struggle between the 2 of them leading up to opening night of the play that they're producing, which is titled Temper. I myself have a theater background. I'm not an actress. People always like to ask me that, whether or not I'm an actress. And the truth is, I have not acted in a play since high school. I did, musicals and stuff like everybody does in high school. But my background in theater is primarily backstage and also theater history, literature, and criticism. So I have a master's degree in that from Ohio State University. And I'm not currently involved in the theater world, but a lot of people that I'm close to are, like my partner is an actor. A lot of my friends are in the Chicago theater scene. So I was interested in setting a book in this world. Also, I think like back in college when I was an English theater double major, and people would ask me, well, like, what do you think you're gonna do with that? What do you do with that? Like, how are you going to make money? And I didn't have an answer then, but I guess it turns out that the answer is that I wrote a book about theater. So that's sort of the way that I used both of those degrees. So while the events of this novel are completely fictional, they were actually inspired by a real life scandal in the Chicago theater scene, which, if any of you logging on today are from Chicago or familiar with the theaters here, you might have heard of this before. But for those of you who haven't, I'm just gonna talk a little bit about this real life scandal that inspired the book. So Profiles Theater. This was a storefront theater in the Buena Park neighborhood of Chicago. So it was like a really, really small, intimate venue. I actually saw a couple plays there back in the day. And for years, there were a lot of rumors about the artistic director there, Daryl Cox, just people talking about his bad behavior towards people at the company. And it was almost like an open secret kind of thing, like the Harvey Weinstein case, where everybody knew that this guy was no good and people would sort of whisper about it, but he was still working, people still wanted to work with him, and it was all just this big open secret. But then in 2016, Amy Levitt and Christopher Piott at the Chicago Reader published this article here, this incredibly detailed expose about Cox and the abuse that he'd been inflicting on people in the company. And it just went off like a bomb in the Chicago theater community. Like I said, I'm not even directly involved, like I don't work in the theater community, but I was very aware of this because all of my friends were sharing it on social media and talking about their own experiences with this guy. And it was just a huge moment. This actually led to the formation of the organization Not in Our House in Chicago, which has created a set of standards and rules to prevent this kind of abuse from happening again. And then the theater company closed shortly thereafter. This picture here is from shortly after this article came out, and people went and pasted it all over the windows of the theater in protest. And shortly thereafter, they shut their doors, never to open again. So when I heard about this, like as a feminist, as a human being, I was completely appalled. I mean, it was really awful, the things that he was doing. He was abusing people, not just physically, but psychologically. I mean, it was really intense. But as appalled as I was as a thriller writer, you know, we tend to be very attracted to the darker sides of life and very interested in that. So I found myself fascinated by the power dynamics at play here. Like, how could a guy like this get away with this for so long? Why would people put up with it? Why would they keep wanting to work with him? Like, what mystique did he have? I mean, it almost felt like a cult leader where he had all these people under his sway. And I just found that so fascinating and wanted to write a fictionalized kind of version of that sort of power dynamic between an actor and the people he's working with. So that's where Temper originally came from, was just wanting to write about that power dynamic and explore that in a deeper way. But not only did my theater background sort of bring me to the story and make me interested in this, and you know, there's this real life theater inspiration behind the book, but my performing arts background is really part of my entire creative process as a novelist. I don't even think I realized just how much until I started putting together this presentation, and I was like, wow, yeah, this is really, it's through every single part of my creative process. So that's mainly what I'm going to talk about today. So just to begin, another thing I used to do in theater in my days in theater was I was a dramaturg, which I'm not sure if people know what that is. Maybe this meme will help, I don't know. So a dramaturg is essentially an advisory position for a theatrical production. So the dramaturg is in charge of maintaining the integrity of the text of the play and contextualizing it for the director, the actors, and the audience. So this is basically, like, if you're a dramaturg, you're the biggest theater nerd possible. That's what I was. Like, I was doing all this historical research for various plays in college and graduate school. And as a dramaturg, I would do things like, I would research these really like obscure details from the script, not just for historical plays, but sometimes for contemporary ones too. There might be a reference in there that the actor wasn't familiar with or the director wasn't familiar with. So I would go to the library or search online and find a resource that would explain what it meant. Also, as the dramaturg, you would kind of try to make sure all the words in the play were pronounced correctly, especially if there are like non-English words or something like that. You want to make sure the actors understand the more arcane details of the script. So I would like write up things for the actors to help them understand their character better based on the context. And then not only is there that portion of it where you're sitting in on rehearsals and kind of giving notes that way, you also are connecting with the audience by writing program notes, maybe making lobby displays, things like that. So if you've ever been at a play and sitting there bored before it starts and flipping through your program and you see one of those like long detailed notes about the background of the play or the inspiration behind it or whatever, like often that's been written by a dramaturg. So that's most people's familiarity with the role comes from there. And otherwise, like outside of the theater community, it's not really well known. But what this means for me in my writing process is, because I have this background as a dramaturg, I actually have a library science degree as well. So I just really, really love to research. That has been a huge impact on my writing process. I love to research. I could probably research forever and never actually write the book, except my agent would get mad at me. She does eventually want me to write a book that she can sell, but I get really, really into researching, and that helps me so much, like to get the details of the world right and the details of the story. So for Temper, some of the subjects that I researched were, first of all, other stories about abusive or bad behavior in the arts, which there are many, many, many. Even though Profiles and Daryl Cox was the jumping off point and the initial inspiration, there are so many people like this. I mean, mostly men, but just people in the arts. I think there's something about the arts where, you know, people are so passionate about it and there's so many intense emotions, it just really lends itself to this kind of abuse and intensity. So I did a lot of research on that. And then I also did a lot of research on the psychiatric condition of psychopathies, like psychopaths and sociopaths, because these two things are related, as it turns out. So for example, I looked up a lot of things that ended up in the book itself, like little details of actual abuse cases in theater, or just like intense method acting techniques, because this is where a lot of this comes into play, is actors who are method actors who get really, really into character and maybe like stay in character for the entire production process. That can go very bad sometimes. So a couple of the stories that I found through my research that I ended up using in Temper as like actual things that this terrible director, Malcolm Mercer, did was like the movie star Shia LaBeouf, if you guys have heard of him. I found this story about how on the set of one of his movies, he had it was a scene where he had to have like a cut on his forehead, and the makeup artist had created a fake cut, but he didn't think it looked realistic enough. So he would get a knife and actually cut his forehead so it would look more real. And then between each take, like it would scab over and stop bleeding. So he would cut himself again to make it look more real. So I used that for Malcolm in the book. Another one was the director and acting teacher, Lee Strasberg. He apparently at one rehearsal, there was an actor who was gesticulating in a way that he didn't like. It wasn't what he wanted, and they wouldn't stop doing it. So he had the stage manager tie their hands behind their back and like made them basically do the scene tied up. So I used that in Temper as well. And this one was also Lee Strasberg. He showed up a lot in my research. There's an anecdote about him watching an actress perform, and she's, again, like not giving him what he wants, but he leaned over to the person next to him and he said, "I can get it out of her," which is like so chilling. I just read that over and over in my notes, and I ended up using almost that exact line for Malcolm in the book. So these little details really informed my creation of this character and the tension between him and the main character, Kira. And what's been funny to me is like it's all based on these real life anecdotes. Like really nothing that Malcolm does is something that I made up, but like a lot of it is really based on these other cases that I read about and found through my detailed research. But a lot of readers, I've gotten the response for this book, a lot of readers tend to think that Malcolm is so like over the top and it's unrealistic that people would put up with his behavior. And the truth is that even though I based it on all these real life things, I kind of had to tone it down in the book, or he would have just been a cartoon villain, essentially. Like I wanted it to be a little bit more of a gray area in my book, just to make it more interesting for the reader. So it wasn't just this like plainly villainous person. It was more complex for Kira to figure out like what he's up to and what his motivations are. But it has been fascinating to me that I get so many reader comments that are like, this is so over the top, this is so unrealistic, like no one would do this. And I'm like, actually, the truth is in real life, it's a lot worse. This is a toned down version, like for the sake of fiction. You know, that thing they say, if it's stranger than fiction, like you can't put it in a book because it's too over the top. That was my experience with this book. All right, so in addition to all of this research that I did, like, which was mostly reading books and watching interviews with actors, reading articles online, stuff like that. There were some things in Temper that I couldn't just research, you know, in the library, like the Dramaturg that I used to be. I had to go get some more hands-on experience. So one of those things was stage combat, which plays a big role in the book. So this is my friend, Christina Gorman, who is an actress and a fight choreographer here in Chicago. She's worked at Steppenwolf, Red Orchid, Steep, various other places. And when I knew that this book was going to involve stage combat a lot, I wanted to talk to her to make sure I was getting it right. So in Temper, one of the main characters is a fight choreographer for the play that Kira and Malcolm are doing. And so he's there. There are actual scenes with this fight choreographer character who is like explaining to them how to do the action in the show. There's like a slap and like a choking moment, and he's explaining to them how to do it correctly. And then one of the ways that Malcolm pushes the boundaries with Kira is he keeps making her do things over and over and over again and trying to get her to have like real emotion and kind of snap and do the violence for real, which is not how you're supposed to do it in theater. It's all like very carefully choreographed. It's all staged. So I needed to know, in order to write this authentically, I needed to know the correct way to do it and then the wrong way to do it. So Christina here was very helpful to me. I took her out to tea. We are at the Knee in Lincoln Park here. I don't know if anyone's ever been there, but it's delightful. They have great pastries and tea. And I took her out and I had her show me how to fake slap people, how to fake strangle them, like basically all the stuff I needed to know for the book. And we got some really weird looks, let me tell you, but it was very helpful. She explained all this stuff to me. So for example, like the slap, when you slap someone on stage, you don't actually hit them. In film, they often will do that. They'll actually do a contact slap and like hit someone, maybe not as hard as you would in real life, but they'll actually make contact between their hand and their face. But in theater, you tend to do a no contact slap, which is like it's carefully staged so that the person is turned just right. So it looks like they're being hit, but they're actually not. And then you make the sound of the slap by like one of the actors will tap their arm or their thigh or something to make that kind of skin on skin sound of the slap, but it's all separate. So there's no physical contact, no danger. And then in Temper, in my book, there's a scene where they're doing the slap correctly that way. Then Malcolm makes Kira do it over and over until she snaps and gets angry with him and hits him for real and makes him bleed. And of course, Malcolm is like, great, exactly, that's what I wanted. Now you're finally like feeling it. But what he's having her do is so dangerous. Like you can burst someone's eardrum. Like it's really, really, really serious. So I wanted to show that in the book, sort of like the correct way, the incorrect way. And this is also, Christina is right here. She's showing, this is the hand position that you do for choking someone on stage, because you like brace your thumbs just so you're not actually pressing down on their throat. And then the person who's being choked will like grab the other person's wrists and like kind of hold them back. So there's no pressure on the throat. It's not dangerous at all. And one of the most interesting things I learned from Christina over the course of this meeting and her giving me kind of a crash course in stage combat was the concept of victim control, which basically means that the person who is receiving the violence on stage, so like the person who's being hit, the person who's being shoved, whatever it is, that person who looks like they're being attacked, who looks like they're in danger, is actually the one who's in control of the entire scene. They're the ones controlling the timing, the intensity, everything. So while it might look dangerous, they're actually in control the entire time. And this concept, beyond just informing the stage combat scenes in the book, really informed the relationships between the characters entirely. Like it became a big theme in the book. And actually the original title of the book was Victim Control. That's what I called it before my agent picked me up, and she wisely had me change it. She didn't like that title. But because, like I said, Malcolm is not overtly abusive in the way that some of the men I found in my research are, in the way that Daryl Cox was. He's more manipulating people. He's like pushing them to do things that they shouldn't do, to like commit violent acts. Like he doesn't hit Kira, he goads her into hitting him. So that happens in various ways throughout the book, and it's essentially that theme of victim control. Like he looks like he's the victim, he's the one who's bleeding on the floor, but he's the one who's calling the shots and controlling everything. So another way that my performing arts background informs my writing process is sound design. So I essentially create like a sound design for each of my books. And this is one of the first steps in my writing process. As soon as I have a tiny little idea for a future book, I will create a Spotify playlist and I'll just start adding songs to it. So these could be songs that have lyrics that remind me of the plot or the characters, or that just sort of sound like the book to me in some way. Like I can't completely explain it, but it's just like the vibe and the sound of the book. And I'll start adding songs. You can see like this one has like 600 some songs. I have playlists for books that I have not written yet that have hundreds and hundreds of songs on them. Like this is something I'll do way before I even start writing, and then I'll just listen to the playlist over and over as I'm brainstorming, kind of like thinking about the characters, the mood of the piece, whatever. Like it's a huge part of my process. I don't even know how to write a book without this, to be honest. So I listen to the playlist while I'm kind of free writing, taking notes, but also just while I'm doing the dishes or walking around or on the train, just to keep myself in the world of the book and keep myself thinking about it. And I come up with some of my best ideas that way. I typically don't listen while I'm actually writing. I prefer silence, or sometimes I'll do one of those like white noise apps or something like that. But the exception is if I'm writing a scene that is like super, super intense and I want to get deep into the characters' heads, then sometimes I'll listen to one song over and over and over again, which is kind of insane, but it works for me. So like this song here, Touch by July Talk, I don't know if anyone's familiar with it, but it's very like dark and moody. And I listened to that while I was writing the finale of Temper, the like big showdown between Kira and Malcolm on opening night. I listened to this song while I was writing it, and I probably listened to it like 100 times. I just put it on repeat, and it helped me sink into that headspace of the characters and just like stay in that moment for as long as I needed to in order to write the scene. And now whenever I hear it, I'll always associate it with the scene in the book. All right. Another thing I do that is sort of performing arts based is I cast my books. So some of my author friends call this face casting. It's essentially you choose famous actors or less famous actors, like whatever your preference is, to base your characters on physically, which it can help you describe them and also sort of get their type and their vibe. Like, I mean, I think we all know there's certain Hollywood actors who are cast as certain types of characters a lot, so it can be a good shorthand. And it can feel kind of silly sometimes. Like it feels a little like you're like pinning these celebrities up in your locker or something, or on your bedroom wall. And I do actually print out pictures and put them on my office wall for inspiration sometimes. So it feels a little silly, but it is very, very useful. And I've actually found it helpful now that I'm interacting with the Hollywood world a little bit more. Temper has not been optioned for the screen yet, but my second book has. And I did this for that book as well, like where I came up with actors who had cast as the characters. And when you're speaking to a production company or anyone in Hollywood, they'll often ask you like who you see in each role. And it's not so much to like, it's not so much that like that specific actor would play that role necessarily, but it can kind of tell them, it's like a good visual shorthand and tell them what kind of type you're looking for. So these are the actors that I imagined as Kira and Malcolm in Temper. So this is Alexandra Breckenridge. She I know her from American Horror Story, but you might know her from, I think she's on The Walking Dead, This Is Us. I think she's on a Netflix show now called Virgin River, I believe. But I just love her look for Kira is great. Like she just kind of looks like she's up to something. And then this is Oscar Isaac, who you may know from the Star Wars movies. And I pictured him as Malcolm from the very beginning. When I originally had the idea for this book, it was always him that I was picturing. And I think he's such an incredible actor. Like I'm really in awe of him as an actor. I've seen a lot of his movies. And one of the biggest challenges of this book was I had him in my head. I was like imagining this performance that he was giving as Malcolm, like when I was imagining the scenes in this book. And it was so difficult to boil that down and capture it on the page. I felt like he was giving this great, like completely imagined performance in my head. He was giving this great performance, and then I had to write it down in a way that like it would come across to a reader. And that was a huge challenge. Hopefully I got there. And actually late in the editing process for Temper, so after it had sold to my publisher and I was working on edits with my editor, I got to see Oscar Isaac play Hamlet at the Public Theater in New York, and he was like even better in person than I had been imagining. So that was cool, especially because in Temper there's like a backstory element of this famous production of Hamlet that Malcolm had done when he was younger that Kira went to see. So it was cool to see him in that play especially. Let's talk about setting and why I set Temper in Chicago specifically. I'm thinking a lot of the people on this call are from Chicago, but if not, I can talk about a little bit. The theater scene here is, well, right now it's all shut down and I miss it very much, but before the pandemic, and I hope after, things start to open up, the theater scene here is so vibrant and so interesting. There's a lot of just tiny theaters and larger theaters doing very interesting work. And in Chicago, like I think the difference between Chicago theater and theater somewhere else, like New York City, is it is all about the authenticity and the quality of the work. Like no one is really doing theater in Chicago in order to get rich and famous. Like not that, I mean, some people do. There are certainly people who come through Steppenwolf or Looking Glass, and now they are very famous, but that's not the intention like it might be on Broadway. So it's much more about the work here. And that was important to me. For the characters in this book, that just seemed like this is the place where they would want to be making theater. And also the storefront theater scene, which again, if you're not from here, although I think they have these types of theaters other places, like a storefront theater is a very small theater that's built in a former retail space that might have like 50 seats, 90 seats, sometimes even less. So it's a very, very intimate space. I've been to storefront shows where the actors outnumbered the audience. It can happen. But I thought that was perfect for this story because I wanted it to feel really claustrophobic. Like I said, Malcolm is almost this cult leader figure, and he's got this small number of people around him. And some of the stuff he's getting away with, I don't think that you would be able to get away with in a larger organization in quite the same way. Like it's really just him and the executive director of the company, who's named Joanna, and they have like an intern and then designers who come in, but other than that, it's basically he's like the god or the dictator of this small company, and it's very claustrophobic, close-knit. It's like a family in all the best and worst ways. When I was meeting with editors, a couple of them suggested setting the book in New York or LA instead. Like they thought that would make the story better. They were like, it could be the same story and the same characters, but just what if you set it in New York? And I completely refused to do that because I thought, this is a Chicago story. This is a Midwestern story. It has to be here. And the editor that I ended up choosing to work with in the end, she was very excited about the Chicago setting and she wanted me to put more Chicago flavor into the book. So that was partly why I knew she was the right person to work with. It has been interesting just talking to New York people, because like everybody in publishing is in New York, just trying to explain Chicago theater to them because all they really do know is Broadway. Like they ran an ad for this book once that it said the book was set in the gritty downtown theater scene in Chicago. And I had to contact the marketing people and be like, it's not really a thing in Chicago. It's not really the gritty downtown theater scene. That's not like, that's a New York thing. Think again, like downtown Chicago theater is like big musicals, touring companies, stuff like that. So that communication gap has been interesting. But I did, like I said, my editor wanted me to put in more Chicago flavor, more local settings. So I had a bunch of scenes. There's some of these were in the original draft, and then some I added as we were working on revisions, but that are set at specific landmarks in Chicago. And since I love to research, this was a good opportunity to go and explore my own city in a little bit deeper way. So most of these places I'd been to before, but I would actually go there again and take pictures and notes and everything. And it was interesting to see them in a new way, like seeing them more as filming locations or whatever for my book. So then when I got my finished copies, I took them around to all of these spots and took pictures. So that's what this is. This is, there's a big scene between Kira and Malcolm that takes place at the Adler Planetarium. So that's where I am here, like that peninsula that goes out to the Adler. And then some other Chicago locations that are in the book. This is at Lady Gregory's in Andersonville, which is one of my favorite places to eat, or it was before the pandemic, and I look forward to going back. This is the Holiday Club at Sheridan and Irving Park. There's a scene set there. And then this is the Shakespeare statue in Lincoln Park, where in the book, Kira and Malcolm meet up there to do this very intense acting exercise to get to know each other better. And I've had a lot of people in Chicago tell me that they actually learned about this statue from my book. They didn't know it was there. It's sort of, it's like off to the side in the park near the Lincoln Park Zoo. And I guess people just hadn't come across it before, but it's one of my favorite landmarks. And I love, as a big theater nerd going way back, I love to put Shakespeare references in my books as much as possible. So I mentioned there's the production of Hamlet, and then the theater company in the book, which I imagine being in the Lakeview neighborhood, sort of where Theater Wit is, but the theater company in the book is named Indifferent Honest Theater Company, based on the line from Hamlet. And I just had to include this in the presentation. I had a friend of mine who's a graphic designer for local Chicago theaters come up with this logo for the fake theater company in the book. And I have it on like a coffee mug and a tote bag, and I'm just obsessed with it. So I had to put that in there. But yeah, I love just working Shakespeare references in any way I can. My second book, They Never Learn, has quite a lot to the main character, teaches a Shakespeare class and teaches about Titus Andronicus and some other stuff like that. Okay, so that was all a lot of sort of external stuff for, you know, how my theater background informs the look of the book and the sound, like how I'm imagining the characters. But my theater background is actually a huge part of how I draft my work too. So let me tell you about my weird writing process. Okay, so for all of my books, I still do this. I started doing it for Temper, and it's really stuck. I write the first draft in a format like this. So it is like a script format with just the character name and like dialogue tags, little like stage directions. And then sometimes they'll have small descriptive passages just talking about like the room that they're in or something, sort of like how you would describe a setting in a play for a scenic designer. And then after I've done this, and I'll either do it for the whole book or I might do it in sections. Either way, I write it in the script format and then I adapt it into prose. So this is the same moment in the finished book versus my script. And you can see if you read these, some stuff has changed. Like here, he doesn't kiss her, here he does. Like it's not a 1-for-1 match. But what this does, I mean, it sounds like a lot more work, I'm sure, to write it twice. But for me, it actually saves time because I, as a writer, I'm a huge perfectionist. I spent years of my life not writing at all because I was, just so obsessed with like, I had to get the first sentence perfect before I could move on to the second sentence, that kind of thing. And it just really held me back. So once I started doing this, what it helped me do was get me out of that mindset a little bit. So when I'm writing the script version, I'm just figuring out like, where are the characters? What are they physically doing? What are they saying to each other? Kind of the basic action, the external action. And then after that's done, I can go back and make it pretty and make sure that, you know, the word choice is what I want and that the sentences flow and that the pacing is right and all of that kind of stuff I do in later passes. But without that, I think, like, if you're trying to do that all at once, it's just too much. For me anyway, it's basically like you're trying to decorate a house that you haven't even built yet, which makes no sense at all. So for me, this scripting process, which is very much like, I used to be a playwright, and so this comes really naturally to me. The scripting process helps me build the structure, and then I can decorate it and make it pretty and kind of finish it off in later drafts. So it actually, even though it's multiple steps, it ends up being faster for me. And then the final way that my theater background has informed my writing process is, everyone knows, okay, that theater is a very collaborative process. And you might not think the same of writing a book. I actually didn't. When I first started out, I used to joke that I wanted to be a novelist because, like, as a playwright, you can only control the words on the page, and then like other people come in and they, you know, they cast the actors, and the director might make different choices that disagree with your vision. And so I was like, okay, as the author of a novel, I can control everything. But it actually is an incredibly collaborative process. Writing a book is as well. So like, this is just one little paragraph from the acknowledgements page from Temper, and you can see I am thanking many people. So my agent, my editor, these are like multiple editors, publicity people, my film agent, like all of these different people are involved in the creation of the book and bringing it to a bookstore near you. Like, it is hugely collaborative, even though you have a little bit more control artistically as a novelist, I think, than you do as a playwright. There's still a lot of people involved, and that's for the best. Like, I could not have made this book the book that it is without the input of all of these people and the hard work of all of these people. And so I think working in theater first really prepared me to create in this collaborative way now, and to realize that like more people contributing is strengthening the work and not taking away from it or ruining my vision or anything. And it's paid off as well, because another project that I'm working on right now is I'm co-writing a book with several other thriller authors. It's going to be an Audible original coming out later this year, I think. But that's been like, it's me and 3 other authors, and we collaborated to create a whole outline just to devise the story together. And then we each wrote chapters and combined them. And so that's been incredibly collaborative and kind of like devised theater in a way. So that's another way that I think my theater background has set me up for success as an author. All right, that is it for me.
For everyone watching at home, before we got started, I said to Layne, I was like, oh, I bet we have a lot of mutual friends, because we have both spent a decent amount of time somehow involved in the Chicago theater community. But I was laughing during your program because the way I connected to your program was actually through a landmark and a celebrity. I had my 30th birthday party at the Holiday Club.
Nice.
Yeah, and then in a former world, I worked at the film festival, and I had the pleasure of meeting Oscar Isaacs, and he is Isaac. He is way too nice. He's like the nicest guy on the planet.
Oh, really? I've never met him. I think I would die.
He was, and I barely this was back in 2014, and so it was, you know, I knew who he was, but he just was the nicest guy. So I love it, but also a good enough actor to pull anything off.
Yeah, I kind of wanted, like, the reason he was the best inspiration for Malcolm for me is like, he had to be someone who was like handsome and talented enough that people would just let him get away with anything. That's what I feel about Oscar Isaac.
Well, and also briefly, and we're going to get to questions, I swear, is with my Chicago theater background. Yeah, I mean, it's easy to believe that someone would let someone like Harvey Weinstein do something, right? Because Harvey Weinstein is promising fame and fortune and stuff. So why would anybody believe that someone in a small black box theater in Chicago would let something like that happen? But unless you are, when I first moved to Chicago, it was, I mean, I didn't go, I was a bridesmaid in a wedding, and I skipped the rehearsal dinner because I had an improv show. I mean, it was everything around you. So I totally believe every word, because when you're immersed in it, it's all you know.
Yeah, it's like an obsession. I mean, it's people's true passion. So many people who are working in theater, and you'll do a lot for passion.
Yes. All right. Now on to the more important people. We've got, well, first of all, Georgia Parcham had a great question. So Georgia, why don't you unmute yourself and ask? Hi.
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 Oh, Layne, it's just interesting because as you were talking, it evolved and you kept talking about it, but I still don't quite understand why you would turn away from playwriting. And would you think going back to it in the future? And did you publish what were some of your plays actually performed and published, or
None of them have been published. I more did it in college. It's sort of how I learned to write. So I was never a professional playwright. To be honest, writing books and now like screenwriting pays a lot more. So I probably wouldn't go back, but I do love theater. I do love theater.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Georgia. And who's to say that one of your books can't be turned into a play?
I've had people ask me that about Temper, if I would ever adapt it for the stage, and yeah, totally. Why not?
Absolutely.
It's like a play within a play within a play.
That would be so fun. All right. Susan Monteleonis, unless I butchered that. Can you unmute yourself? You've got some, no access to Audible. Okay, she says, do you feel you will stay with suspense thriller stories, or is there another genre you would like to try?
I think I probably will, because I have, like, before I was published, I tried to write some other genres, like a little more sci-fi, a little more romance, and it just always ended in people being awful to each other and like murdering each other. So I think suspense is where I'm meant to be.
But there's some good hybrids out there that kind of like find the fine line between romance and suspense. It would be awesome. Joyce Porter, who is a local actress, says, thank you for insisting it stay in Chicago. And yeah, I totally agree. For people who think that you have to generalize everything by being only in one of two places, it's kind of silly.
I love telling my Chicago theater friends that story just to see their faces, like the editor asking me to. They're so offended, and they should be. I mean, it's just like, we have one of the best theater scenes in the world. If you're going to set a book in the theater, I think Chicago is the perfect place for it.
Well, absolutely. I mean, if you look alone at like the Jeff Awards, like the people winning those and the nominated and the stuff going up is just incredible. Duana says, thank you for these excellent answers. Although had no defined questions, feel now I know local theater. So here's something fun. So when theater is back up and running, which of course we're all hoping will be maybe for the fall season of 2021, can you give a couple of local theaters that maybe our watchers aren't familiar with that might be good to check out?
Rivendell Theater is really great. They do like female focused plays. And I mean, Steep Theater is probably one of my favorites. I live up in Rogers Park now, but I used to live in Edgewater, and I was right around the corner from them. Like, I would pass them every time I went to the train. I know they're looking for a new space now, so I'm not sure where they're gonna land, but they're one of the best small theaters. Like, their current space is so tiny, it just sells out all the time. So I'm hoping like they'll find a bigger space and more people can go, because their work is incredible. I've never seen a bad show there.
And it's not a joke. Deb Hammond's the 16th Street Theater. I believe that's out here, I think. It is not a joke. There are some black box theaters that are so small, you literally have to go onto the stage to get to the bathroom.
Yep.
Which is awkward in so many ways. And like, you're sharing, there's no green room sometimes, or it's like this big, which is fun. But again, if the work is good and the people you're working with are good, then it doesn't even matter. Oh, it's Deb says it's in Berwyn.
Okay.
Well, it says Roosevelt Road, Berwyn, OP, which is Oak Park. So I am, look it up yourselves. Yeah, there are there's so many good. And then of course the theaters that are larger but are producing original works, right? So you mentioned the downtown Chicago ones that are really the touring companies, and the sometimes they try stuff out, which is great, that are gonna end up on Broadway. They try it out in downtown Chicago, but then there's Steppenwolf, there's Goodman, there's stuff that's big, kind of in that middle.
Yeah, Looking Glass. They do really interesting stuff at Looking Glass.
Absolutely. Okay, we have a question. I think this will probably be our last question. Jonathan Kelly. Psychopaths are very adept at imitation, camouflage, and subterfuge. Do you think they are attracted to theater as it is a way to hone their skills?
I think Malcolm in my book is that was something I thought about a lot, because psychopaths they're like natural actors. They're always acting. They don't really have, I mean, I'm not an expert on this by any means. I read a lot of books about it, but I'm not an expert. But it's like they don't have a personality underneath. They're just reacting to everyone around them. So the book is actually, it's in two points of view. It's Kira, and then the other point of view is Joanna, who's Malcolm's business partner. And in the scenes with Kira, he's one way, and in the scenes with Joanna, he's another way. Like, he's really reacting to them and is always performing on stage, off stage, whatever. So yeah, I think actors could be attracted to that. I know psychopaths could be attracted to acting. I mean, I know that there are a lot of psychopaths on like Wall Street in business, probably more than we want to know about.
Politics.
Yeah, politics. I always like to think about like, what would Malcolm do if he didn't have this outlet? Like, that he has this theater company that he started when he was young, and so that's like his source of power. But if he didn't have that, like, would he be a serial killer? Would he be like the president? Would he be a cult leader? Like, I don't know. He'd have to have some sort of outlet for it.
Okay, one last question that's based on what you just said. Is that why you did not make the book from Malcolm's point of view? Because he did not have any depth behind, there was no original behind him?
Exactly. And I've had people, I've gotten reviews, including in the Chicago Tribune, where the critic mentioned like, oh, I wish we'd gotten Malcolm's point of view, or that would have made it so much richer. I wanted to understand him. And there's really nothing to understand. Like, he's just manipulating everyone all the time, and that's how these people like function. Really, there's nothing underneath it. And I wanted to puncture that myth of the male artistic genius, because I think we excuse a lot of bad behavior. We're like, oh, he's a genius, he's making incredible work, so we can let him treat people this way. And it's like, there's really nothing underneath it. Like, it's just manipulation.
Well, and if you had given him a backstory where, you know, he was abused by a stepfather or something like that, it would have provided a lot of excuse for his behavior, as opposed to this is just where he's at.
Yeah, I have a backstory for him, like I do, that I wrote up, but it's not in the book. And I talked about that with my editor. We both felt that it was better to just leave it. Like, there are a couple little details mentioned of kind of what he did before he started this theater company, but I didn't want to go too deep into it, because then, yeah, people are like, oh, he was abused and like, it's not his fault. And it's like, it is his fault.
Yes. Okay, so Carol Conboy says something interesting. She says, can't wait to read your book. Layne Fargo, where can we get our hands on this amazing book?
Pretty much anywhere. I think they have copies at some indie bookstores in the city. Like, I know Women and Children First carries it, but it's on, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, all the major outlets.
Fantastic. And do you have a website that people can visit?
Yep, laynefargo.com. And all my social media is like at Layne Fargo.
Okay, so you hear that? laynefargo.com. It's going to be, if you look at your email that you got your confirmation for today's program, I'm sure it's in there. It's also right under her picture right now, laynefargo.com. You can find out more about her current book, her book we just discussed, which is Temper. Her current book, which again is called
They Never Learn.
They Never Learn. And then also, and if, you want to send, Joyce Porter says, I'm sure the book table can order it. And that's a local bookstore in Oak Park. They tend to kind of have, Jason just has everything. I mean, every time I'm like, let me see if they have it. They always have it. So look that one up. But They Never Learn, Carol Conboy is the book that is being optioned for a movie. So
for TV.
For TV, sorry. Just because something is being optioned does not mean it's 100% definite. It means it's step 2 on a you write it first, and then you gotta get in front of people, and then it has to be optioned, and then there's like 6,000 more steps. And then we have this little thing called the pandemic going on, which I'm sure has slowed things down also.
It actually hasn't. That's what's so funny in Hollywood, I think, because they were benched for so long and couldn't do anything. They're really like moving on a lot of these adaptations. It's interesting to see. But yeah, it may be a TV show someday, it may not, but I'm having a lot of fun working on it.
So would it be a series or would it be a like a 5-part?
It would be a series. They had me come up with stuff that could happen in later seasons, and now I'm so obsessed with the ideas that I came up with. I want to write sequels, which I've never wanted to do before.
That's amazing. Yeah. That is really, really great. Oh my gosh, that's so great. Well, thank you to everyone who posed questions. And Layne, is there, every time I say your name and no one's gonna get this, I want to say Layne Meyer. Do you know what I'm referring to?
No.
It's a John Cusack movie from the 80s.
Okay.
His character's name was Layne Meyer, and they always, anyway, moving on. Is there any last words you'd like to give us before we say goodbye to you?
Just once theaters open, please go to them so they can stay open. I know I will be. I'm like wanting to buy season tickets now. I'm just, I miss it so much.
And season tickets are a great way to immediately give some influx of money into these theater companies.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Deb, Layne, thank you both for being on today. If you want to see what we're doing next Monday, you can go to our website at www.19thcentury.org. Our Monday program series goes until the middle of May. And again, every week is another great program. If you want to help us continue to put on these great programs, consider making a donation right on our website, www.19thcentury.org. Well, enjoy the sunshine. Have a wonderful day, and we will see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you.